What's going on, y'all? This is Gary with the Bottom Word, and today I have a pretty interesting video to react to. So recently, Lil Wayne, did a video with an interview with Mr. Acho, I believe is his name, about mental health. And Lil Wayne opened up about some mental health struggles that he had when he was a kid, as well as some mental health struggles that he had during his rap career as an adult. And I just wanted to give some perspective on the things that he said. I want to see if we can find some type of spiritual component to the things that he's talking about, and give you guys a little bit of my take on what he said from God's perspective, from a biblical viewpoint, from a Christian perspective. So I hope this is going to be interesting for you guys, because this video is not in any way Christian or spiritual, but I'm going to see if I can look at it with the spiritual eyes and see what we can discern from this video. So if you're interested in that, stay tuned. We're going to go ahead and dissect the things that Lil Wayne talks about. So let's get into it. Yeah.
So what was the moment that you realized, oh no, this is a mental health issue?
Once my thoughts got radical and got, to where you got to stop yourself and stop impulsing and say, what did you just think again? Or even if you cried yourself to sleep with that thought on your mind and wake up the next day and be like, I cannot believe I was thinking like that.
Thoughts like what?
Thoughts like killing yourself.
You thought about killing yourself.
Well, Acho, when I was 12 years old, school year was kind of ending. So what the school was doing was they was giving us half days on a Thursday and a Friday. It may have been a Wednesday as well, but what I would do was just tell my mom that I only had a half a day on one of those days. So therefore I stayed out the rest of the whole day, just like it was a full day. She found out. And so when I got home, on that thing, it was that Friday, whatever, I got home, got a phone call from my aunt, was like, she found out, but all that rapping and all that, she about to take that rap photo, and I was like, wow, so all that had built up to me. So that was a build up. Hung up the phone, thoughts everywhere, thoughts everywhere. Main thought was, I'm gonna show you. Main thought was, I'm gonna show you.
What were you gonna show her?
How I know I had mental health problems was I pulled the trigger.
You actually pulled the trigger?
Yeah, I pulled the trigger.
Where'd you shoot?
In my chest.
So there you have it. Lil Wayne talked about how when he was a kid, he skipped school, and his aunt told him that his mom was going to take away all of his raps that he had wrote, and that was threatening what he wanted to do in life. Before that, he was talking about how his only desire and his ultimate goal was to be a rapper. And so when that was threatened to be taken away from him, he felt the need to take himself away. And so he made an attempt on his life by shooting himself in the chest. I see here an identity crisis. And a lot of people have identity crisis, including myself. I have had an identity crisis before. And this is what an identity crisis looks like. When you find your identity, or your sense of living, your sense of being important, and your sense of having a purpose in this life, in something or someone other than God. Now, why is the other than God there important? Because anything other than God is not going to be guaranteed. It's not going to last forever. It can be taken away from you. It can waver. And so when you place your identity or your sense of purpose and value and meaning in something that is temporary, wavering, something that can be taken away, then you're going to experience times and seasons where you lose purpose, you lose meaning, and you lose value in your own eyes. And that is detrimental to your mental health. That is detrimental to your mental health. And that is why we need to find our identity in God. So let me go ahead and break down what Lil Wayne was dealing with there. Lil Wayne was essentially finding his identity in being a rapper. And his identity, as trivial as this might sound, as a kid was in those raps that he wrote, was in those sheets of paper that he wrote. So his mom taking away those sheets of paper with those lyrics on them was like taking away his identity, or like taking away the value that he had in this world, the meaning that he had in this life, and the purpose that he had in this life. And for a kid, that's super, super detrimental. And it was so detrimental that he was willing to take his own life. He actually shot himself in the chest, and the only reason he survived is because the paramedics were able to come in before he died, and of course because God decided it wasn't his time yet. But this is how placing your identity in something other than God can ultimately have an impact on your life. Now, we're going to keep going forward and see that even as an adult, Lil Wayne struggled with the same identity crisis even as a successful rapper, one of the best rappers ever, and from the world's perspective, and one of the most famous and popular rappers ever. And he still had the same identity crisis. So let's go ahead and show the clip.
It's what you creating here because of your situation. And again, so you start to think, well, do anyone actually care? Will it matter when it's all over? Will I matter? And that's what that's always the question. Mm-hmm. Well, will you matter when it's all over? Will you matter? Not the things you've done, the things you've done for everyone else, but will you actually matter to them, but most of all to you?
So you heard it yourself. He asked the question, will I matter? Will I matter when it's all said and done? And what he was referring to was, one, when he's done rapping, and then two, when he dies, when he's gone, will he matter? Now, the reason he's even asking this question is because he had already placed his meaning and his identity, his value, the thing that makes him matter, he already placed that in being a rapper. And so, of course, the thought is naturally going to come, what is going to happen when I'm no longer a rapper? Will I still matter? Will I still matter? So he was still struggling with the same identity crisis from a kid all the way to an adult. And even after achieving the very thing that he thought would give him a sense of purpose and meaning in life, it was at risk of being taken away from him. He knew it wasn't going to last forever, and so he was back faced with the same issue. There we have it again. Placing your identity in something other than God, something temporary, is ultimately going to lead you to having those seasons of being depressed, being down, not knowing why you're here, and having no sense of purpose in this life and no sense of value in this life. And then, practically speaking, that could ultimately lead to suicidal thoughts and even suicide itself. Let's go ahead and play this next clip to see what was the lowest point of Lil Wayne's career and what was going on behind that as well.
At the height of you being a star, what was the lowest point of your career?
Not being able. That's a good question. When I was going through the situation with my record label and they wouldn't allow me to put an album out or put any music out. So when you compare that to whatever my mental health problem, my problem was back then, it was because I wasn't being allowed to do this, to be productive and be creative and to feel that I would love to do so.
So as an adult, the lowest point of your career was your label not letting you put music out. How bad did that hurt you? What did that do to you mentally?
My reaction or my actions that I wanted to take was quit. I wanted to retire.
Wow. So his label pretty much threatened to take away his ability to create, to rap, to make music, to put it out there to the world. They kind of restricted him in the same way that his mother was possibly going to restrict him when he was a kid. And so he started to experience the feelings of, I feel like quitting. I just want to quit rapping and just be done with it. And that's not suicidal, but it's the same kind of attitude in terms of, I want to give up, I want to quit. And I don't want to read too much into this, but I can imagine that the same way Lil Wayne thought about his mom and said, I'm going to show her, and then his showing her was him quitting, giving up on life itself. I can imagine the same way he was thinking to the record label, I'm going to quit rapping, I'll show them, as if they need him and as if it was going to hurt them or cause them some type of harm for him to quit rapping, and it probably would have. Now, I'm kind of reading into it a little bit, but I can definitely imagine that that could have been driving his desire to quit. But then we see ultimately that he did not quit. Now, I will venture to say the reason he did not quit was because, once again, there's an identity issue, right? If he quits rapping, who is he? Does he matter anymore? Is he important? So even though he had the desire to quit, the thought of what would happen if he quit probably kept him from quitting, because quitting for Lil Wayne, quitting rapping would be the equivalent of losing your very identity, losing who you are, losing yourself, going into oblivion and not being important in this world anymore, and essentially no longer even existing in any meaningful way. So I can definitely see that Lil Wayne was struggling with an identity crisis. Now, I will say one thing, that that identity pursuit to rap and those things, that did drive him to be one of the most successful rappers ever, one of the most successful rappers ever, because he so desperately wanted to have his identity, and he thought that his identity was in being a rapper, and it drove him, just like, rest in peace, Kobe was driven to be one of the greatest basketball players of all time. In the same way, Lil Wayne was driven to be the greatest rapper of all time. And so you can see that. But even though he had achieved it on some level, he was never fully satisfied, fully fulfilled, and he never fully found peace, because even at the height of his fame, he still had questions. Will I matter when this all is over? How can we avoid that? If he simply had placed his faith and his identity in Jesus Christ, someone who never changes, someone who gives you a purpose that is not based on what you do or how well you can perform, but just based on his love for you, if he was to place his identity there, then he would find security, he would find peace, he would find stability in his soul, to where he wouldn't have to ask these questions. See, as a Christian, when I think to myself, what'll happen when I die? Will I matter? I think to myself this: I'm never going to die. I have eternal life. Death for me is just passing from this life to the next life. And according to God, I have a purpose in this life, and I also have a purpose in the next life. So that means that my purpose will never run out. My purpose is eternal. So, in God's eyes, I will always matter for all eternity. And that's one of the most secure thoughts you can ever have when it comes to your identity. So I want to encourage you today to place your identity in God. Place your identity in Jesus Christ and who they say you are, who they made you to be, and the purpose that they have given you and destined you for, because it is indeed eternal. Don't place your identity in your money. I've heard people say, hey, I have so much money, people should respect me, and they identify themselves by their money. Don't place your identity in your success. I've heard a lot of people talk about all of their accomplishments, and that's how they identify themselves. You can tell how someone identified themselves when you ask, who are you? Tell me about yourself. And the person, instead of telling you about themselves, they tell you about what they've done. They tell you about their career, their profession, or something like that. And so they're identifying themselves by that thing that they respond with. But if you ask me, who am I say, I am a child of God. I am a child of God. I am a servant of Christ. I identify myself by those things, and those things will never change. That identity will never fail me. It can never be taken away from me by anybody. My identity is firm, secure, and eternal. So I'm encouraging you to find your identity in Christ.